I see some familiar faces in the audience who will understand what I'm talking about, because to me the topic tonight is on a subject and a substance that if I'd had available to me during my years of practice and research and education would have made me a far, far better physician than I was. And I sincerely mean that. I sincerely mean it because I happen also to be a patient who is receiving medicinal cannabis by prescription and legally. And if I wasn't receiving it, I would not be here tonight. Or probably not be here tonight. So it's coming from my heart as well as my head and my understanding of the science. I'm not talking tonight about the clinical aspects of medicinal cannabis. I want to really start at the beginning, and that is an overview of the history and why we are where we are at the moment with regard to medicinal cannabis and hemp and all of the associated substances. So this presentation is actually dedicated in loving memory to my family, friends, and the late Lady Dulcie and Sir William Keyes. Why? Because Sir William was a dear friend of the family, his wife Lady Dulcie Keyes, and my two children when they were very, very young. Sir William was the first person who I really witnessed the benefits of cannabis when he was given cookies by his daughter to relieve the severe pain from mesothelioma that he contracted while a soldier in the Korean War and being exposed, of course, to asbestos. And I witnessed the change in relief of pain when the opiates were not working, and the change in his wellness and personality came back to being a jolly old soul instead of a miserable person with severe pain. That was back in 1999. So medicinal cannabis. I'm going to talk tonight about the history and the endocannabinoid system. This is a crop of cannabis growing it's cultivated in China. China has some of the greatest areas of cannabis grown and the production of CBD, one of the ingredients in the world. This is a friend of mine, John Easterling. He's got a lovely plant here. It's a female plant, and you can see all of the flowers on that plant. John happens to be the husband of Olivia Newton-John, and he's making medicines in St. Innes in California for his wife and helping her in her journey with the pain of secondary cancer or metastatic breast cancer. This is a close-up of the flower and the leaf, typical leaf shape there, and even closer up of the flower, and if you look carefully you'll see these little white dots. They are known as trichomes, and these are the trichomes in higher magnification, and they contain the oils and the cannabinoids and all of the other ingredients that go with the plant for what we regard as therapeutic use, therapeutic effect. Here's another very high-powered micrograph of the trichomes and other parts of the plant that produce things called terpenes and flavonoids and many other sesquiterpenes and many other ingredients that the plant has. Medicinal cannabis is the most therapeutically diverse herbal medicine in the world. And I refer to it as a herbal medicine because until we take the chemicals out of it and purify them, it remains a herbal medicine. It's a very safe, effective herbal medicine. It's used specifically to treat illness, ideally prescribed by a qualified healthcare practitioner and individualised to the patient. What is one man's meat, one person's meat is another person's poison. What I'm saying is individuality is a crucial factor in nutrition. It's also a very crucial factor when you're prescribing medicinal cannabis. Cannabis facts, it's been a maligned weed for too long. It's a plant of many uses. We can use its fibre, food, it can be used to make bricks, it can be used to make clothing, it can be used to make nearly anything. It's a real disruptor. It's going to be a real disruptor, especially of medicine and medicines. And you'll understand this probably when you see its broad spectrum of activity. It's a potent healing herb. It's a potent medicine, and it can also be a potent drug. So there's a whole spectrum from a food to a drug. Just imagine, grapes are a food. Wine is a drug. The myths surrounding cannabis. There is no evidence for its medical or health benefits. Wrong. There's more scientific work being done on cannabis at a basic science level and a clinical science level than nearly anything else in the world at the moment. It causes cancer and heart attacks. Wrong. It is safe to smoke. Wrong. It is a gateway drug to opiates. Wrong. It's safe in pregnancy. We don't know, but I wouldn't recommend it. And not at this stage. Although if we see in the future infertile couples using medicinal cannabis, we'll understand that it does have a mechanism of action that will help in infertile couples. It causes schizophrenia. Wrong. It may actually, parts of the plant may also be very useful in helping patients with severe mental disorders and psychoses. It increases your risk for social anxiety disorder. Well, am I anxious tonight? I don't think so. I'm quite happy being here with you guys and telling you my experiences. As I said, it's coming from my heart. I'm very happy to be taking 1 drop, 2 drops a day of an oil that keeps my pain away. And there is no scientific rationale for its use. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. We'll go into the history and then I'll show you where the scientific rationale is. Its history of use, it's been evidence of human cultivation and use for over 6,000 years, in fact goes back to about 10,000 years. In ancient India, over 3,000 years ago, it was used for anxiety and known as bhang, or bang. In eastern China, cannabis was discovered in 2,500-year-old tombs. In the US, in 1869, the colonists set to grow cannabis for hemp export to make rope, paper and fabric. And medicinal cannabis was used as tinctures for migraine, pain and spasms, traditionally. This is Ernie Hare, a comedian expressing his thoughts on prohibition in 1920. Well, alcohol was prohibited back then. And then Harry J. Anslinger came along when the de-prohibition of alcohol occurred, and he had a whole department of people in the US who had nothing to do. So Harry J. Anslinger, picture of the lovely man there, became head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and in 1937 the Marihuana Tax Act happened in the US, and that's when marijuana and cannabis was banned and became, according to the United Nations, a Class 1 narcotic drug. It is not a narcotic drug if you use it medicinally. And then along, of course, came William Randolph Hearst, the paper magnate, the newspaper magnate. He had thousands of hectares of cannabis growing in Mexico for paper. He was kicked out of Mexico for some reason by the president. So he attacked the Mexicans who were crossing the border and bringing MJ or Mary Jane or marijuana with them and smoking it. So there was a war on. It's a very interesting history. This is Mr. Hearst here, somebody who is responsible for a lot of heartache in the world, because he and Hollywood and others in the United States attacked hemp, attacked cannabis, attacked the Mexicans, and they did it by producing films like Reefer Madness, where the gentleman here was meant to have had a madness episode after smoking a reefer and killing somebody. That never ever happened. And then of course the newspapers and advertisements got into it as well. So she should have said no. Pain and anguish, hopped up harlots, psychotic dope fiends. Never happened. Never happened. A vicious racket with its arms around your children, debauchery, degradation, vice, insanity. Whoa, you don't see that with cannabis. You might see it with alcohol, but tobacco and alcohol were the drugs of choice for the industries at the time. And cannabis, because it was soft and gentle and sweet and didn't cause too much harm, was banned because it suffered a dose of politics. Politics. Marijuana crazed youth kills. Never happened. Reefer madness. And of course we've got Richard Nixon with his war on drugs. Reefers may, smoking too much cannabis, marijuana, may cause a psychotic episode, but you can get over it. There are other reasons why people who smoke marijuana have psychosis. They already have a predilection for mental illness. So Richard Nixon and his war on drugs. Wars, we never win wars. In fact, the war on drugs has actually created a bigger problem with drugs in the community. Now we have the politicians in America talking about cannabis be the next thalidomide. It's just not happening. The studies prove it. But that's what the politicians are talking about. Even back then, the government, politicians in America now are making statements like that the government was a swamp of self-serving liars. Well, I'm not going to make any comments about our government here, but we have a politician in the audience who is on our side. The US Declaration of Independence was drafted on hemp paper. The sails of the Mayflower were on hemp, were made of hemp. The American flag was always made of hemp, and the uniforms of the military was made of hemp. After 1937, when the war broke out, yes, what did happen? We grew hemp again in America because we needed it. Hypocrisy. Popular culture brings it to a more modern era, if you like. And this is when I was a teenager when these guys came out, and I love their music. I still love their music. They're very, very creative. They were never psychotic. They were never antisocial. But I'm not saying we should be smoking. I'm not talking about recreational cannabis. That's another discussion for another time. Personally, I do believe it should be available and we should have the right to choose. But the Beatles, fantastic musicians, unbelievable, almost as good as Beethoven. These guys, 2X Crims, for dealing drugs and selling drugs in the US, they are now good boys. They grow their own cannabis and they share it with their friends to relieve anxiety. It doesn't lead on to heavier drugs. And this is the sophistication of it at the moment in the US, where if you want a good reefer, you get somebody to select the right flower for you, and they will tell you this will help your pain, or this will help your spasms or your arthritis and so on. Now, it's got some very interesting names here, like Poison, Ebola, King Bobber, Kamikaze. It's very, very colourful. But I have to show you this because this is a part of the history. It's not necessarily saying that I'm endorsing it, but I think it's fun to understand. These are some figures for annual deaths in the US. From tobacco, 435,000. Poor diet and exercise, 365,000. I'd say it's much more than that now. Alcohol, 85,000. Marijuana, 0. Peanuts, 100. So, it's safe, even when it's used as a drug. Safer than the grape that's converted to the wine. Nobody has ever died from medicinal cannabis. Fact. Back in the 1876, the Pharmacia of the United States of America contained in it cannabis. Cannabis indica and Cannabis americana. The Pharmacopoeia. Now that tells you something, that the medical profession accepted it back then. Did you know from 1870 to 1937, cannabis was used as the prime medicine for more than 100 separate illnesses or diseases in the US Pharmacopoeia? When it was taken from India to the United Kingdom, Queen Victoria is reputed to have used it for her period pain, for his dysmenorrhea. History. This is Merck's manual, the manual that all of the doctors used to use to see what they would use for, what they would prescribe for various conditions. And these are all the conditions that it was used for. If it was useless, why would the United States take out a patent on the cannabinoids? As Charlene mentioned, Canada. It's not the cannabis, I can assure you. Canada has been legal for doctors to recommend, not prescribe, recommend. Just write a little note, recommend it. Go across the road to the pharmacy and, or the dispensary and pick up your medicinal cannabis. 18 years, over 18 years in Canada. Recently they legalised it in October last year as a recreational cannabis. In China, I've done a number of, many trips to China for various reasons, professional and business. And they have some of the biggest grows of cannabis. It's illegal in China, but they have some of the biggest grows and do the extraction of the medicines and export to the rest of the world. In Australia, over 2 million Australians use it recreationally. Between 100,000 and 120,000 people excuse me, use black market medicinal cannabis. Medicinal cannabis was available until the late 1930s in Australia. It was used as tinctures for migraine, pain, spasms, and as I mentioned, Queen Victoria may have used it for her menstrual problems. How are we going? Time?
Yeah, another couple of minutes.
Oh, another couple of, okay, I better rush. There are 3 deaths a day from opiates in this country. 3 deaths a day. Over 1/2 ton of marijuana is consumed every day in Australia, according to official statistics. So what's going on here? Why can't patients get it like I get it for my pain? We've got 5 million Australians with chronic pain, and how many Australians are getting medicinal cannabis now prescribed? About 4,000 or just over 4,000. Pathetic number after 2 years of legalisation. Cannabis is a gateway drug. Greg Hunter's mentioned that to me on a number of occasions. It is not. It is wrong. It is completely incorrect. Drugs were legal in Victoria, weren't they? We've got the author of this in the audience. My grandparents and parents had access to prescribed cannabis in Melbourne. Here's the old pharmacist's logbook, and again I must thank in the audience for the access to this. The old pharmacist's logbook in Camberwell, talking about cocaine, cannabis and tincture of opium. I remember one of my doctors who trained me used to use tincture of opium in his practice a long time ago. This is the way it's presented in various forms, in bottles and tinctures and liquids and oils. You can see here that Eli Lilly was one of the manufacturers, one of the modern drug companies. Now, I'm just going to mention the endocannabinoid system because that's what I've been asked to talk about. The endocannabinoid system is a system discovered roughly about 20 years ago. It's a system in the body where we actually manufacture our own cannabinoids. We actually manufacture molecules like the cannabinoids we find in cannabis. The THC and the CBD and the CBG, CBN, all of the cannabinoids can be mimicked by manufacturing our own cannabinoids. One is known as an anandamide and the other is known as 2-AG. And they're complex molecules, but they're made out of 2 simple molecules in our own body. And one is an essential fatty acid called arachidonic acid, which we get from meat and milk and so forth. Fascinating, isn't it? That we are actually walking around not knowing that we are highly illegal substances. Now, just what I'd like to mention here is the endocannabinoid system. Humans and animals have endocannabinoid systems. Even the microscopic hydra has its own cannabinoid receptors. Parrots have them, elephants have them. You go across the whole animal kingdom. We produce these cannabinoids. Many illnesses and pathological states are now thought to be associated with deficiencies in or a malfunctioning of the endocannabinoid system. And what it means is this is one nerve and this is another nerve. That's nerve A, that's nerve B. Nerve A is producing a whole lot of impulses and sending them across as chemicals or neurotransmitters to nerve B. Nerve B is going, this is coming from the brain and this is going to a muscle. It's causing spasm because there's too many neurotransmitters being pushed, transmitted across that gap there. What happens here is that our endocannabinoids are produced and they go back the retrograde form of inhibition, and they say stop producing all of these chemicals, and that switches it down or modulates it. THC from exocannabinoids can act on the same receptor there. So if we're not making enough endocannabinoid ourselves and inhibiting the production of and release of the neurotransmitters, we can use a THC or CBD, comes along and does the same thing or a very similar thing. And then it's quickly broken down. We produce the endocannabinoids only on demand. If we're stressed by infection, trauma, even by taking exercise, can produce it. And here is a body, a person, as you can see, and we see the receptors are known as CB1 and CB2 receptors. These are the endocannabinoid receptor system and its distribution. And most of the CB1 receptors are in the brain and spinal cord. The CB2 receptors are in the liver, spleen and lymph glands and immune system. They're also in the brain as well, but when we talk about the receptors CB1 and CB2, it's very important because when we're talking about cannabis, the plant, if we've got a high level of one of the cannabinoids known as THC, then it actually operates on the central nervous system. And this is when we get the high from smoking it. If we take smaller doses, it actually modulates the nervous system and relieves it of pain and depression, anxiety, and a whole range of other symptoms. So we can see it's got a profound effect on the immune system and also the nervous system. Sorry, I'll go back. Just to mention that women have endocannabinoid receptors in the lining of the uterus, in the endometrium. And we believe that this is a very important part of the embryo implanting itself on the endometrium. So we're looking at something here that can be very important for fertility and conceptual outcomes. As I mentioned, anandamide and 2-AG, there are other endocannabinoids. There are receptors and there are proteins involved in the synthesis, transport and metabolism of the cannabinoids. The CB1 and CB2 receptors are responsible for modulation of pain and providing relief of pain or analgesia. CB1 and CB2 are responsible for regulating emotions and cognitive function. The regulation of appetite and gastric motility, CB1 mostly on the central nervous system. Regulation of the immune system and inflammatory systems, if you've got inflammatory disorders, CB2. But there's a lot of crossover here. But one of the most important things about the cannabinoids is that they're not like the opiates. They do not suppress the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. If you take an overdose, the receptors don't appear on that part of the brain, on the brain stem, the medulla, the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system that's responsible for heart rate, blood pressure and respiration rate. So you can take a roomful of cannabis plants, extract them, and you won't kill anybody. Okay, I've been giving a little finger here from a very dear friend. And let me just mention, the cannabis plant, the male is useless. It's the female flower that produces all the good. Who said that? Okay, let me just very quickly cover some of the important areas of research. If you have an illness and you suffer from symptoms, it may be due, and always think, it may be due to a failure of the endocannabinoid system. Because when we look at the use of this plant now in America and Europe and Israel and Australia, medicinal cannabis is used for nearly any symptom in the book of any disease. And it takes us back to that Merck manual that I showed you earlier. So from my point of view tonight, the message to take out is Think medicinal cannabis first, not last, as a medicine of choice, because medicinal cannabis is a very safe, effective herbal medicine that does not hospitalize, that does not kill, that does not addict, and is not subject to abuse. It should be the medicine of first choice. Thank you.